Hello, everybody. New location. I'm actually off for the rest of the week, but I'm so excited to be joined today with a wonderful author. Dr. Jennifer Long is the author of a book, When Crisis Strikes. And I think right now we could all use her advice more than ever. Just a tiny crisis has struck, and she is going to be talking about her 5-step plan and I'm trying to add her in here. There she is. This 5-step plan on really healing and growing in crisis, which I think is something we could all use right now. Dr. Love, hello. How are you?
Hi, good morning. It's so nice to speak with you today.
It's so good to speak with you too. It's so funny. I just called you Jennifer Long because I just did a Zoom with Dr. Daria Long, and my day has been back to back to back, which is the usual when it comes to these days. And I think that that's why I'm so excited to talk to you. When you have this book, When Crisis Strikes, it's really, a time that we're living in right now where we're all juggling these balls that we never anticipated us having in the midst of a pandemic, which is a crisis we could have never prepared for. And so before we even get to your 5-step plan on dealing with this, how are you even handling maybe some of your patients or your clients, just the level of stress that many people are facing right now?
It's been through the roof and pretty early on. I think like maybe the first month was okay. And then it just started building. And there was a tsunami of mental health needs. And there was one night where a couple of the doctors in the clinic and I were like, okay, let's just Zoom, let's just touch base and kind of figure out coordinate how we're practicing medicine in a pandemic, because it's obviously something none of us had ever done before.
Mhm.
And so we put aside 15 minutes. 3 hours later, we're all falling asleep. I'm like, guys, I gotta go to bed. It's like 11 o'clock. We just needed each other. We needed that community. We needed that connection for us as caregivers, because even though we have all the tools in the toolbox, we're still going through all that stuff too. So we have our patients who were needing more care than ever, patients, who were afraid to go to the hospital or didn't want to go to a day program or
Mhm.
therapy because of COVID. And so it really over the year it was just this huge wave of needs coming in, and it was quite overwhelming. And, it requires these little adjustments along the way as you go through to figure out, okay, this coping strategy works for now, and then after a while I'm like, wait, I'm really stressed again. So you have to get on to the next coping strategy, and you have to be flexible. You have to practice being resilient as you go through something that's a crisis that's so long, like the pandemic has been.
I want people, and as I see people join in, I want you to feel like you can ask Dr. Love anything, that if you have specific questions for your own struggles, that you can ask them right here. But the one trend that I have seen so much in my own reporting is the struggle of working moms in particular. It is parenting in a pandemic is a challenge like none of us have ever been faced with. But then on top of that, the just almost unrealistic expectations that anyone can get this done. I did a segment on a she session, as it's being called. This is a mass exodus of women in the workplace as a result of the pandemic,
Mm.
because they just can't handle all of it. And of course, they're choosing their family over their careers. And so what advice do you have for a lot of women out there that just feel like they they don't know how sustainable this workload is?
Um, when you are in a position, at least in my life, when I'm taking on a ton of work, there's usually we have the luxury of having an endpoint. I can work
Yeah.
100 plus hours a week because residency is only 4 years long, or med school is only 4 years long, or my fellowship's only this long. And we can give ourselves these time limits in which to function. And this, I think, the most challenging part for me is how just ambivalent the knowledge is, and there's no set time. And I initially felt into the fallacy of thinking, and I should have known better as a psychiatrist, but I was like, okay, I got this. 6 weeks, I got this. It'll be fine. And I set that date because I needed a date. But of course, as we got closer to the date, I mean, it was just heartbreaking. And my friend, who's a psychiatrist, was like, hello, you know this, this
Yeah.
is a thing, you can't do that. And so I think it's really hard when we don't have an end date. And that's really what the book was written for, right? We wrote it pre-pandemic. We wrote it for the life situations that each of us will probably go through several of these during life, as we age, our kids get older, our parents age, and we have to start taking care of them. And so when you don't have that timeline for relief,
Yeah.
I only have to do chemo for this amount of months and I'm done. No, you're going to be done, and then you still have a big question mark. So how do you deal with that ambivalence? And that's really what we get into with the 5 steps that my co-author and I created, is how do you walk through these um, I wouldn't say never ending, but just unclear ending, these chronic stressors. How do you actually do that with all of the transitions that are required? And it really does take these 5 steps. When we created this model, we were like, how many steps? Like, you can't have 3 steps. It can't be too
Mm-hmm.
easy. It has to be accessible, but it
Mm-hmm.
can't be shallow. Like, you have to be able to dig deep. It has to take the place of therapy for people who can't see a therapist, but it can't be too hard that they put the book down after chapter 2. So
Mm-hmm.
we spent a long time figuring out what the steps would be, what order they should be done in, and we turned in the manuscript January 1st, 2020. That was our deadline with our publisher.
Isn't that ironic? Who
So
knew?
then, who knew? But we had the opportunity of using our own steps through the pandemic. And then, halfway through the year, right before publishing, they said, hey, would you write out those experiences? So this first edition has a postscript, the COVID diaries that we did and added in there at the end. So, and this was early COVID, how I did those 5 steps, but it's important to walk through the crisis with the right tools.
Yeah, let's talk about these 5 steps, because whether it's the pandemic and that question mark, as a lot of people are chiming in about how true it is, it's the question mark that makes things so much more challenging. And Operation Shower asked that question. That's an organization that I think is so special. So thank you guys for watching. But, if it's not a pandemic, it's, maybe it's a tragic loss. So you lose a
Mm-hmm.
family member, or you lose someone close to you. That is a never ending question mark as well. That's a new
It
life that you
is.
are now going to be living in that crisis. So let's start with the first step, and where you sort of begin in this journey of healing when it comes to something really horrible.
Yeah. So the steps are based on the 5 fingers of the hand. And
I
the
like that.
first step is the thumb. To get a grip. I did more finger research online than you can imagine, as someone, and my co-author is a clinical neuropsychologist, PhD in Norway. So like, we've done a lot of research in our days, and I had never
Yeah.
researched weird things like, if you had to cut off one finger, which would it be, and what does each finger do? There's weird
Is
stuff
there an
online.
answer to that?
There is, and everyone says the pinky. I'm gonna tell you it's not the
What
pinky.
is it?
Well, I'll tell you when we get there, but
Okay,
actually
sorry.
do
Okay.
you can do the first finger because your strength is in the
Really?
first and
Right here.
fifth. Yeah.
Okay.
And no one ever thinks they want to lose half
No.
of their first finger. I know.
Interesting.
So I know really weird stuff now. But the first one is the thumb to get a grip. And it's really understanding the problem. A lot of times when crisis comes, the alarms in our brain that are hardwired into the brain sound so loudly that all we want to do is turn it off. And so many of us go into this escape mode to try to numb out, and people dive into work, or they dive into alcohol after work, or video games, or pornography, or whatever it is that distracts them. And so the first thing to recognize, when you really have to have an understanding of what your problem is and why it's significant for you personally, you have to stop the escape. So we have in this step help for that because it's easy to say, hey, stop drinking a bottle of wine every night after work or two glasses
Mhm.
or whatever. And people are like, how do I even do that? Right. So, as an addiction medicine expert, I have a lot in there on motivation and how you can do that. But it's really looking at, okay, so what is this thing? So let's say I'm getting a divorce and you may be getting a divorce, and our experiences can be totally different. So the first level, what is the context? We all know the context of 2020. We
Mhm.
all know how horrible it is, the pandemic and all the limitations that came with that, the financial burdens that came with that, social justice movement. It's impossible to ignore that, even when people try. The most contentious election year I've seen in my life,
Yeah.
probably in American history, at least since we've had television. So we have this stress all around us. And then it's like, well, what's going on in my life? So when I look at my 2020, I talk about how when I filed my taxes, someone stole my identity and
Ugh.
filed my tax return. I still don't have it. Like IRS is like pending. I'm like, it's tax season. What do you mean? They haven't figured out if I'm me or this other person who stole my tax returns is me. And I'm like, I'm
Oh,
right
that's
here, I'm right
so
here.
2020.
It is so 2020. Actually, apparently it was a really popular crime because the IRS was closed. And
Yeah.
I know this because I was working, 12 hours a day seeing patients and I couldn't call them. There's no one there. So, but when you start digging down, doing a gentle excavation of the levels of what does this mean to me? If I'm someone who grew up in a very strong family household, that divorce, the end of that marriage or that relationship may have a different meaning than if I grew up in a household where I had a parent who abandoned me. And so, what can happen is we can go through these situations and have, in addition to how horrible they are, really exaggerated stress responses. And other people can look at us and go, wow, you look crazy. But we aren't crazy, we're just wounded, right? And they can't see
Mhm.
the fossils
And
that are buried
carrying
deep
something,
within.
right. And
We're
carrying
carrying
something
something
from your
really
past.
deep. My
Yeah.
favorite saying in my field of medicine and also in my personal life is if it's hysterical, it's historical.
Mm.
So if I'm responding to something like it's a five-alarm fire and there's just maybe a little smoke, but there's no fire, like it isn't about this moment. This moment is triggering one of those fossils deep within. And so
That's so
step one,
true.
getting a grip, is really having a full understanding. Why am I regressing? Why am I getting to this point and then I shut down? Why don't I have words when I'm around this person? Why can't I think of anything to say? All of this has a reason. And so we walk people through how do we completely understand what's going on?
Step two, is this your pointer finger? I love
This
this.
is a
I
pointer
love this
finger.
strategy. This is so brilliant.
So, it's funny. My Norwegian co-author said, "Oh, I want to call this the hand model," and I was like, "No,
That
no,
is way
very
too
different in
many
English.
thoughts.
Dr.
Yes.
Love is not having a hand model."
Oh my gosh, I love
He was like,
it.
"Okay."
Right. Lost in translation there.
So, yeah, completely, completely. Yeah, we look alike, culturally very different. Okay, so the pointer fingers pinpoint what you can do. And it sounds so basic, but when we are in crisis, we are wired to just see the problem, and that's all we see, right? If your house is on fire, you're not paying attention to the neighbor's garden, you are only looking at the house that's on fire. So the first thing we have people do is list all the things you can't control, whatever pops into your mind of stuff that's out of your control. And then we walk people through the process of identifying what they can control, and we give them kind of ideas. It's like a brainstorming session. Well, so you can't control all of this, but you can control your sleep.
Mhm.
You can control actually your schedule with your family. Like you can have a family meeting, you can change the way things are done. You know, can you really, like, are you trapped? Are you the only one who can do your job? Or can you have help? Like, are you so special that no one can fill in and help you out? And then the third question is going back and thinking, well, what can I do about the things I can't control? So we go back to that first list and we creatively figure out how to kind of manage certain things on that list, even though we can't control the outcome. The biggest upset for me in crisis, people who know me would tell you I'm totally a control freak. I think I'm a control freak in recovery because I think I realize it now, but it's like if I'm in a court case and the jury goes out and they're deliberating, I'm out of control. And as a physician, if I get wheeled into the operating room and get put under sedation, I'm completely out of control. That feeling of helplessness for many of us, for those of us who are maybe slight control freaks, that's terrifying. And so step two is really challenging that sense of helplessness to a dual. That in crisis, we don't have to feel helpless. It's like when you're just standing there watching the house burn down, you have a feeling there's nothing you can do. And so when you're going through the divorce, when your child becomes really ill, or your parent who you rely on starts having major memory problems or health problems, when these things that happen in life to us that we talk about throughout the book happen, whether it's a traumatic experience, we feel like there's nothing we can do. So once we understand it, then we can start challenging the helplessness feeling and kind of come up with an action plan. Step two is not about making a ginormous to-do list. Nobody needs to be overwhelmed in crisis. We are overwhelmed enough. Thank you very much. Step two is about creating options for us that our brains, whose alarms are going off, can't naturally come up with without some guidance.
I got some fantastic advice from someone. I've been sending this to some of my friends that are also going through hard times. It's called a worry journal. And so you write down what the worry is, and then you write down one thing that you can do about it. And if there's nothing that you can do about it, and that goes to your control thing, you let it go because there's nothing that you can do if you can't control it. And I just think that that really fits into that second point of it. I'm hoping that the third one is sort of like flipping off your worries or
We all love it. It's give, your crisis the middle finger. I'm sorry, Lynn Smith, I just flipped you off like on Instagram Live.
No, it's sorry. Instagram. It's not cable. We can do whatever.
But this is step three is a step of action, right? So you've got to get the fire in your belly to put some of this into motion and give your crisis the middle finger, right? But you can't do the action until you know what it is and what you're going to do about it. Some people just jump right into action. I was talking with Daniel and Tana Amen on their podcast, and Tana's like, oh yeah, I just get started doing stuff. And I said, well, when you start with action, if you haven't done the first two steps, you're like the ball in the pinball machine, and you're just all over the place. You're not going to get things accomplished that are going to be meaningful and helpful to you. So it's really important to do them in order. But taking action requires motivation. And I don't know about you, but when I'm really stressed, I want to still, like, the little girl in me wants to hide under a blanket for it. And I just don't want to. I want to ignore it. And so we need that help. We need those motivational tools to get going. And so we use a lot of those tools. And Dr. Hovick has a brilliant chapter on this, on kind of dividing up what we need to do into easy tasks and hard tasks. And, I did this when I had to work with the IRS. My fossils is financial insecurity from childhood. So when someone steals my tax identity and everything, I'm like, oh, but this could happen and this could happen and this could happen. And, I started freaking out a little bit. But really, in that, like, getting started, it was like, okay, when I feel chaotic, everything around me is chaotic. And when everything around me is chaotic, I feel more chaotic. So I started giving myself a 5-minute clean, because clutter increases our cortisol levels and we feel worse. We feel more stressed. But I don't want to clean my house in a pandemic. It's a freaking pandemic. I'm working like 12-hour days. The last thing I'm going to do is clean my house. So I said 5 minutes, everything in sight that you can straighten up in 5 minutes. And you'd be amazed at what you can do in 5 minutes. So that's done. It's like, oh, I did something, and then it's like, okay, I'm going to load the dishwasher. Who knew how many dishes there are in a pandemic? When you don't leave your house, I mean, the dishes are crazy. It's like I'm running my dishwasher like every other day. I can't imagine a family of four, like how much you're washing the dishwasher.
Oh, you have no
That
idea.
you can do.
Yeah.
And the
It's so
more
funny
you
that you were
start getting a
speaking my
handle on,
language, right? Sorry, I just lost. So sorry. Your connection was coming in and out. I just interrupted you. I feel terrible. Go ahead.
no, that's
Start
okay.
over.
I was just saying the more you get into doing these simpler actions, subconsciously your brain is preparing to do the bigger things. They don't seem quite so enormous, and it kind of brings it down to scale, and then you can start doing those tasks that initially you felt were tougher.
I was saying that you were speaking my language because I had no idea really why, but I've been like rage cleaning and like my husband
I
found
love that
me.
term. I'm
Oh my
sorry.
gosh. He found me in our closet at like 2 o'clock in the morning and I was color coordinating all of my clothes and lining things up and decluttering for Goodwill. And he's like, hey babe, you okay? Everything okay? And I'm like, no, no, I'm not okay. It's not okay. And so it's almost like that really speaks to me as far as why it gives us some control and how it can give us some comfort and how you don't even really have to dedicate too much time to it to get that kind of
Hmm.
comfort. Okay, so
Right.
as we get on to four, we're getting closer to sort of maybe a little bit closer to how it personally can be freeing of the
Hmm.
feeling. So what is that fourth step?
So I think of the fourth finger as something that's very personal, right? Many people, that's where they wear a wedding ring or some kind of significant symbol. And so step four is called pullback. And this is that stage where you've gone into action, you started getting stuff done, but it's really a season of reflection. And this is probably the step that resonates with my personality the most. You know, I'm not an extrovert. I'm pretty introspective, but there's times in crisis where people who are introspective need to be big and strong and loud. And there are times when people who are big and strong and loud need to be introspective. We need that balance. That's why I co-authored this book with a Norwegian. You know, he's got that Viking blood. And we brought that balance to the book, right? Um, so it's about pulling back and looking at your life and identifying kind of with who I am underneath this all. Who was I prior to the crisis when I started feeling like a crazy person going all over the rails? Where was I? So in my life, I ended up here and I'm getting divorced. We started here. I thought I'd end up over here. What happened? Who am I? What do I want to be? And it's kind of tapping into the parts of yourself that you love or used to love that you don't feel connected to anymore. And thinking about, what do I value in life? I value integrity. If you value peace, well, are you going to keep yelling at your ex in court all the time? If peace is your value, you know, maybe you really value your sense of humor. And so it's really thinking about the personal character traits and also relationships. You know, do you have certain relationships in your life that are toxic? You're going through something and you have that person who just keeps telling you what to do and they're all nasty and in your face and they don't care
Mhm,
about you.
mhm,
You probably can't get rid of this person if it happens to be your mother-in-law. Mother-in-laws get a bad rap, okay? I don't mean to say like they're all bad, but some relationships you can't get rid of, but what are the healthy boundaries that you
mhm,
can have? So it's looking at those relationships. What is my quality of life on a day-to-day basis? And what are the simple things I can do to improve it? How do I simplify my everyday routine? How do I simplify my life? And we have this feeling so often that we can't do it. And a good friend of mine, kind of mid pandemic, she is a psychiatrist. She lives in Chicago, Dr. Flowers. So we're Dr. Love and Dr. Flowers. It's hilarious.
so feel good.
But she's a mom of four kids. So here she is working full time as a triple boarded physician or double boarded physician, and she's got a kindergartner through like a 16-year-old. So she is
Mhm,
like new in school all the way through teenage hormones. And she just said, "Look, you're going to write down the five most important things that you have to do care about it. Like, is that possible? And it's giving yourself permission to cross those things off, to let go of some of that control. You went out a
I
little bit. Did
just
you miss
lost.
me?
I know. I missed that last thing that you said. Hold on. Let me see if I turn this off. Did that help at all? Can you say that one more time of what your friend told you? Because I missed that.
Okay. It's so brilliant. So it's worth repeating.
Yeah.
She said, write down the 5 things you have to get done today and cross 3 off the list guilt-free.
Yeah. That's
She's
brilliant.
like, you are a human in a pandemic. Like,
Yeah.
let go of the control. So, there's varying different strengths and vulnerabilities we each have. And so, doing these steps, some of them are going to be harder for others. People with perfectionist tendencies, kind of
Yeah.
control freaks and things. This is a new normal, and we have to be okay with that. This is what resilience is about. It's about being flexible enough to thrive, to learn how to thrive under new circumstances. And that's really what these 5 steps are about.
And the alternative is not great. So if you look at it that way, you really that should be your only choice is to thrive. And it's sort of that positive thinking of, the only other way out of this is down. So let's go up because
Mhm.
it's a lot prettier up there. What about the fifth one?
Okay, so what's interesting about the pinky, and I said it before, half of the hand's strength is in the pinky because we have opposable thumbs.
Yeah.
So everyone thinks they should chop off the pinky if they have to. Sorry, it's so you know,
Let's
creepy.
not chop any hands off.
Yeah,
Okay.
no one's gonna chop off any fingers today. Let's just set that as a rule. But if it has to happen, don't let it be your pinky. So it's strong. It helps us to hold on to things. So step 5 is hold on and let go.
Mm.
And so after the reflective stage and step 4, we sit down and decide what in my life am I going to hold on to and what am I going to let go of
Mhm.
that I need to let go of. It doesn't mean I need to forget what happened, but do I need to carry that around with me every day? I may want to hold on to my sense of humor that I've completely forgotten about, when I've gone through this family crisis. If a loved one has an illness, you oftentimes lose humor. And I was talking to someone yesterday, a young woman who's going through a massive mental health crisis. And I said, in the last few weeks, if you had any little pockets of joy,
Mm.
and she could bear it, she said, I think I laughed for like a second once with my sister and once with my mom.
Mm.
And she said, I feel guilty about it because I'm in the middle of this problem. And I said, no, this is what we have to remember, that joy and sorrow can live under the same roof at the same time, and that anger and love can live under the same roof, that we can have all these feelings inside of us at the same time, that you don't have to just pick one and stick with it. So you feel ill, you feel depressed. That doesn't mean you have to stick with that. You're still allowed to look for those pieces of joy and to find them. And so deciding I'm going to hold on to my ridiculous sense of humor that I've shared with my best friend. We've been best friends
Mm.
since kindergarten, so you can imagine how ridiculous we are when we get together.
Oh.
So I'm going to hold on to that silly part of me. And I'm going to let go of my negative self-talk because I beat myself up all the time, or at least I'm going to pay attention to it and work on that. So that final stage is really kind of long, going to come out through the rest of this crisis and move forward in a way that brings me closer to the person I was before it started, but yet different because I've been through the crisis.
And I think the thing that's so comforting about that is that you only have to have that laugh. It only has to be a few seconds, and it
Mm-hmm.
can be something that you hold on to, and that it doesn't,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to laugh all day long. It's okay. Um, I have to say, Dr. Love, this has been such an insightful. I mean, I knew I was excited to talk to you because this is such a timely topic, but it's been so insightful. And how you did this with the book and the strategy of the 5 steps and the intention that you had in each finger. It's just so fascinating. And I'm so grateful that you joined me. And I just want you to give a chance to let people know where they can find you and get your book.
Great, thank you. And I'm so happy to be here. I love talking with you. So I'm on Instagram at Dr. Author Jennifer Love. It's a lot, but there's a lot of Jennifer Loves. And
Hey, you think there are a lot of
so,
Lynn Smiths?
yeah. So here's the book, When Crisis Strikes, 5 Steps to Heal Your Brain, Body, and Life from Chronic Stress. There we are. And we are in Target, Barnes and Noble, on Amazon, anywhere books are sold, you can find it. Just remember, it's green, you can't miss it. It's behind me, it like jumps out, right? And it's
I
everywhere.
love the
And
cover.
I would love to hear from people on Instagram and how the steps are working for them. And I hope this is just a book that people can really enjoy. We were really insistent that this book represent us as authors. And we were told initially, when you co-author a book, the book has to be cohesive. And I remember distinctly saying, if I'm blue and Cheltura is yellow, the book isn't going to be green. I mean, the book ended up being green, but that was like, I'm going to have my voice, he's
Yeah.
going to have his voice, and it's going to be distinct, or we can't write this book. We are so vastly different. And so each chapter kind of has our name with who did it. And so you really get to know. And the thing I love is my patients are telling me, and my friends, even my mom, they said, I feel like you're sitting in the room reading to me. Like the style that we're talking today is the voice of my chapters. It is a really kind of approachable, that's really what I wanted, is an approachable place for people to come and feel like they can laugh. I hope my favorite comment was from a patient of mine who's 80 years old, and she was 15 minutes late to her appointment. She's like, I was reading your book, I lost track of time. And she says, I love it. It's just like you, but you're snarky. I'm like, I just loved it. This little 80-year-old woman telling me I'm snarky. I'm like, okay, yeah, I am, because it's crisis. Yeah.
Well, I also love that your personality comes out in such a special way here on Instagram Live, and so I have no doubt it comes out in the book as well. We had so much fun too, which I never really anticipate when we're talking about crisis, that it can be fun and you can find joy. I
Mhm.
think that's really the whole point of this. Dr. Love,
Yeah.
congratulations on the book. I'm so glad, actually, it was Daniel Amen, Dr. Daniel Amen, that connected us, and he has the foreword in your book. So he is a pretty special person who's been here on All Good Things along with Tana. And so thank you to him for making that connection. And all good
Hmm.
things to you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me, Len. It's super fun morning.
It was. Take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye.